Hello everyone and welcome to this meeting of the James Gillespie's High School Parent Council. I'm Sarah Scott, the Parent Council Chair. To start, can I make the usual apologies for any technical issues we might have during the meeting? For example, if you're having problems joining us or hearing us, or if one of the presenters' Wi-Fi freezes. As always, we ask for your patience. As for our last online meeting in November, there are live captions available for this meeting, provided in English, Polish, Ukrainian, Italian, Urdu and Chinese, simplified and traditional, and you can access them via the settings button in Teams. So just a few other points before we start the meeting properly. The only people who can be heard during the meeting are the presenters, and everyone else attending can write questions via the Q&A panel but can't be heard. The questions will be published for everyone to see by our parent moderators. So if you would like your question to say private, please say so when you type it in. And if you see a question on the Q&A panel that is similar to one that you would like to ask, could you like that question rather than ask a repeat? That will help us get through as many questions as possible through the evening. Please also make sure that all questions and comments are expressed in an appropriately courteous way. The meeting is being recorded and it will be put online for those who can't make it this evening, so please remember not to share any personal information that shouldn't be made public. We will try to answer as many questions as possible and to cover a range of topics. However, if you put forward a question which we don't manage to answer and you still need a response, please follow that up by email to the school or to the Parent Council after the meeting so we can deal with it then. And finally, on the introductory points, we're aiming for the meeting to last between an hour and an hour and a half. The Q&A board will close before the end of the meeting and a notice will be posted to let you know when that is happening. So tonight, the format of our meeting will be as follows. First, I will give an update on Parent Council activities. Then we will have the presentation from Ian Coulthart, Science Curriculum Leader on Science Teaching at the school. So welcome to the meeting, Ian. We will then take questions on that presentation and on anything else related to science teaching and the work of that faculty. Following that, Neil McCallum will give his head teacher's report and then there will be the general Q&A. So to start with, the Parent Council update. So the first item here is a plea for assistance. Now that we have school events up and running again, the Parent Council has a team of people helping out with refreshments at events such as the Christmas concert and Spring Fling, which is coming next week. This is one of the ways that the PC has traditionally raised money for our Small Sums Fund. However, it's also a way of making school events even more sociable and enjoyable. Aileen Nimmo is a team leader for refreshments. We thank her for all her hard work. But we are currently looking for additional people who would be able to help at events. If that might be you, then please let us know at the PC email address jghscouncilcoms@gmail.com. If you put your name forward, don't worry, you don't have to be helping at every event. You would be on a list of people who are contacted for availability as events come up. It is a really great way to get involved in things and to meet other parents, and we really do need more assistance to keep this going, so please consider if you would like to get involved. One event the PC provided refreshments for recently was the opening event for the Darach Annex at the beginning of February. It's an event which had been put back on a number of occasions because of strikes and other problems. After all the delays over the last few years in the completion of building work, it was great to see the Darach functioning as a school once again, and it also looks really great. Can I turn now to engagement with Edinburgh Council? The council has just set its budget for 2023-24, and the budget originally proposed involved cuts to education services, including speech and language therapy and inclusion and support, and also general cuts to devolve school budgets. And our parent council, along with some other parent councils in the city, wrote to the council and councillors to raise concerns about the potential effect on schools and children of this approach. On the day of the meeting, there were two other budgets put forward, one by the SNP and Green councillors and the other by the Lib Dems. And in the event, the council administration abandoned its own budget proposals and adopted the one put forward by the Lib Dems. So this will involve fewer cuts, but it appears it will still involve some reductions in some areas. And the council have told us they are now looking at what this will actually mean in practice for schools in discussion with the schools. So we will let you know when we get further information on that. Also on the council, the South East North East locality group, that is the group of parent councils from the South East and North East parts of Edinburgh, meeting with council officers, had a meeting on the 8th of March. So some of the issues discussed were vaping in schools. This was also discussed at our own parent council meeting in February. Parent councils across Edinburgh have urged the council to have a plan of action to support action which has been taken in schools themselves on vaping, and this is going to be considered again at the council's next Education Committee meeting on 27th April. Another issue where there was lively discussion at the locality meeting was active schools. There are still problems in many schools across Edinburgh in getting active schools up and running again, with a new model focusing on provision of coaching by volunteers. Parent councils have asked for this to be on the agenda again for the next meeting of parents with the council, which is the consultative committee with parents, which is now going to be on the 20th of April. It's been delayed from this week. So this issue will also be considered again at the next Education Committee meeting, again on 27th of April, and again at the committee meeting in June. And what PCs have asked for is for the council to examine what activities are actually happening in schools and plan from there, rather than planning without that information being available. At the locality meeting, questions were also raised about the council's position on school excursions. The council are currently examining the whole policy on excursions for the future, looking particularly at questions of equity and equality of access and sustainability. Parent councils wanted to know when the review would be completed and whether it would allow for overseas travel as we knew it before COVID. As it has been reported that some other local authorities have been considering the future of foreign trips, particularly on the grounds of equity. Of course, at the moment, the council position is still that a lack of appropriate COVID insurance means that there are no overseas school trips for the time being, and there is still no news on that position changing. So parents at the meeting asked for there to be more transparency on this and also consultation with parents and families about any proposal to change what had been the position on school excursions before COVID. As at many previous meetings, parents also brought up issues surrounding the adequacy of school IT infrastructure, which has been an issue in lots of different schools. And also they brought up the expense the schools are trying to mitigate problems which the IT infrastructure causes for them. So this is an ongoing issue which has been raised regularly with council officers and at the Education Committee over recent months, and I envisage will continue to be raised with them. Sadly, at the locality meeting, it was also reported that one of the big issues facing some schools and parent councils at the moment is families struggling to cope with cost of living rises, with some parent councils even operating food banks in the school. It was great to hear about solidarity and action, but also extremely sad to hear about the extent to which that is necessary. And finally, on the council, at the last parent council meeting we had, I reported that we had written to Joan Griffiths, the convener of the council's Education Committee, asking the council to engage with the school community here on planning for capacity at the school for the coming years, both in terms of accommodation and in terms of assuring that there's an appropriate teaching budget in place to cover the needs of both English medium and Gaelic medium teaching at the school. We have not had a full response to the request yet, though it has been acknowledged, and we will continue to pursue this issue. Another thing we heard about at the last Parent Council meeting was the A Plus Group, a new project which has been set up with the support for financial support from the Trust and is led by parent Zaki El Salahi. The group is for parents and carers of young people at the school who are from the African and Asian diaspora, but with space also for those from other parent groups within the school. And the school has already circulated information about the group, and there's also information on it on the Parent Council website. The next session of the A Plus group is at 6 p.m. on Wednesday 29th March on Zoom, and anybody interested should register with Zaki, and his contact details are on the Parent Council site, or contact the Parent Council for further help. This session will have both what is termed safer space for the core group and also open space for all other people. Turning now to education reform. The Hayward Review is currently running a consultation on a proposal for a new model of qualifications and assessments in Scotland. And this includes changing the balance between internal assessment by schools and external assessment by exam, and also plans for pupils not to take exams in the same subject multiple years in a row. Also for the better integration of academic and vocational qualifications, for the better use of digital technology for assessments and for gathering evidence on achievement, and also for broadening evidence gathered about achievement beyond specific subject areas, but also looking at other areas such as work, volunteering, cultural activities, etc., and also working across subject areas. So as part of this review process, the National Parent Forum of Scotland and Connect are gathering the views of parents and carers. We have a post with further details on this on the Parent Council website, and there's also a link to the survey which they're running, which is open, I think, until 6th of April, though that may change because the consultation has apparently been extended past the 7th of April when it was meant to be closing, but I'm sure that will be on the survey itself if you want to go and have a look at it. Connect is also hosting a live online discussion for parents and carers with Professor Hayward, who is running the consultation, looking at the proposed qualifications model, and that is on Wednesday the 29th of March. And again, there's a link to register for the meeting on our site. Now turning to Parent Council finances. Since our last meeting of 1st February, we have paid into the Parent Council bank account £410.36 in cash, which constitutes proceeds from the December events, which is the course choice evening and the Christmas concert, £57.95 from Sum Up, from card payments during the Darach opening evening, and we also have a further £90 from this that will feature in the report for the next Parent Council meeting. We also have received the third Easy fundraising payment of the year on 14th February, which was £100.89. In terms of payments out of the account, on 20th March, we made the payment to the school of £2,000 for the Donald MacDonald Award for Kindness, which parents donated money towards at the end of the last school year. And as reported at the last Parent Council meeting, we've arranged for the school to hold and distribute this money as the awards are made over the 5-year period for which it will run. Another payment of £108 was also made on 20th of March for the Parent Council's Teams licence for August 2022 to January 2023, and the current balance in our account is £2,147.94. The balance in the Parent Council fund in parent pay on 15th March was £2,088.92, and this includes £910, which was raised in December during the period of our festive fundraiser. So thank you to all parents who donated then, and also who have donated at other points in the year. Funds raised by the Parent Council are paid out annually in our small sums award to school projects, and past projects have included subscriptions to periodicals, specialist books and equipment for learners with additional support needs, specialist art equipment, kits for sports teams, and equipment for Duke of Edinburgh expeditions. There is more information about the Small Sums Fund, including a breakdown of all the money awarded in previous years, on our website in the About section. And one final financial topic. All parent councils had circulated to them via their schools a set of guidelines on handling money, which came from Connect, which is the Scotland-wide body which supports parent councils and parent-teacher associations. It used to be called the Scottish Parent-Teacher Council. And Connect also provides insurance for parent councils, and they are currently doing work to make sure that parent councils are dealing with the money which they hold appropriately. And I've asked for the documentation they have provided to form part of a discussion and review for all parent councils. So we have just got those documents, but they will be posted on our website and will form part of the discussion at the Treasurer's report for the next Parent Council meeting, which is in person on Wednesday, 31st of May. Once those are posted, if you have any comments or questions on this topic, please, as always, contact us on jghscouncilcoms@gmail.com or via the parent section on the school's website. So that just highlights as well that although it's not terribly exciting to read out all the payments that the Parent Council has made, it's a really important part of making sure that what we do with the money is transparent and appropriate. So we are obliged to report at every meeting what we have done and what our financial position is. So that's why you hear that on each occasion. So that's all from the Parent Council just now. Could I just ask Hilary, who is our producer for this evening, to pass us over to Ian Coulthart for his presentation. Thank you.
You're live, Ian.
Okay, thank you. So you can hear me okay? Right,
We
and
can.
I'll just check this is on full screen. And I'll do that now. Okay, that is up and running. Okay, so thank you very everyone for inviting me along to speak for a few minutes. I'll try and keep it to the requested 15 minutes to give you time to ask questions. And just on that front, I'm more than happy for any questions at all about the work of the faculty. Yeah, please ask anything you like. So I've been the curriculum leader of science now for 10 years, but it's actually been 7 years since I've last spoken to the council. So thanks again for the invite. That time I was working with Laura Stewart as the other head of science. And after a few years of working with me, Laura, I think, had enough and moved on to become, as I'm sure you know, a deputy at the school. And I've now been working with Alan Russell as the other head of science for the last 4 years. We just thought it would be better with one of us presenting tonight, but I'm sure you might get a chance to meet him again in the future. So I'll just move on and tell you a little bit about the faculty. So we're a large faculty, the largest in the school. We've got 19 teaching staff now. We've got 4 support staff, 4 technicians. That increased with the GME provision of science down in Darragh. A huge amount of resources to manage, but thankfully with our technicians keeping us right, we do a fairly good job on that. I won't say too much about where we're lacking in resources. Really, there's not much we can do about it, or the parent council. It's in the, as you mentioned already, the space and the capacity in the school. We have 10 labs, plus the lab we have in Darragh as well, but there's not a tremendous amount we can do about that. We do prioritise S1 and S2 to be in the labs, but as I'm sure you'll know with your young people at the school, there'll be times in science where they're out with a science lab. But that's something that we manage, and it's working still fairly successfully. I just thought I'd mention that in the resources section. But the largest part of the faculty is obviously the pupils, and we do have a huge number of them in science, which is great. We have the full 300 or so in S1 and S2, but where our numbers really sort of take off is within S3, 4, 5 and 6, because we can have more than one pupil, if you like, in S3, because you can choose up to 3 sciences. So it's good to see that numbers are growing, obviously in part because of the rising roles, but we've got huge numbers, about 450 or so in 3rd year and 4th year, 250 in 5th year, and about 100 or so, or just under 100 in 6th year. Now that's presentations, obviously some pupils there have been counted twice. The result of that is that out of all of James Gillespie's results or awards every year, just over 20% effectively come through me and my team. 21% of the awards are generated from science. That's about 750 plus presentations. So I do take the job seriously, and we do try and get that right every year, because it has a large part in how the youngsters do overall and how the school performs. So I'll move on just a little bit to talk about some of the courses. So S1 and S2, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about things that you'll be able to find out yourself at coursing evening. So yes, I could mention about topics if someone asks in the questions. I could also explain about how we cover the experiences and outcomes. I suppose it probably is worth mentioning at this point that we have planned, like a lot of faculties in James Gillespie's, we have planned to cover the entitlement for all E's and O's, experiences and outcomes at level 3 to be completed within S1 and S2. The advantage there is it frees up our 3rd year to basically teach what we want, which is to start towards our national 4 and 5 subjects. But if anybody wants any more information about that, of course they can ask in the questions. Same with homeworks and assessments. All I'll really say at this point is we have thought quite a lot about how we do assessment within science. I'll probably say more once we talk about 3rd and 4th year, but it's about getting a balance between formative assessment, what we do within the classroom, and trying to generate some of that summative data so we can track progress. And that's something over the 10 years that I've been managing the faculty that we've really looked quite hard at. And I think we've got it quite well sorted now within science. Again, I don't want to go into all the detail just now, but if somebody wants me to elaborate on that, of course I will. Skills, well, science is a practical subject. So obviously practical skills is one of the more obvious ones that we try and develop. Obviously literacy, numeracy skills, collaborative working together skills, these are something we try and track through S1 and S2. We built a wee bit into our homework programme in that section as well. I think we do a fairly good job on that, but let me know if you think otherwise. Progression into S3, I'll say a wee bit more on my next slides, but if I just go back to mention about some of that summative data, we do use that in helping guide what happens next into S3. So it all starts with when pupils come to us in S1, just building that wee picture of the performance, So we can report home to yourselves as parents so they can get an idea of how they're doing, but also with our progression towards S3. So we'll just move on to that just now. So I know this might look slightly confusing. I've only put on our two main progression pathways here from S2. So you'll see that for both pathways, after S2, this has basically done the BGE science, and they will move on as a whole cohort in the same vein towards National 4 and National 5, and that's across all the sciences. So what you'll notice there is no one is suddenly pigeonholed or restricted to a National 3 or a National 4 class. We want all of our young people to have the opportunity to achieve at National 5, but of course we know that not all will, but we don't make that decision at that stage. Now, it may well be the case that we can use some of our data, and with Miss O'Brien, some of the coursing when they make the timetable up, that it could be that similar ability pupils are able in some circumstances to be grouped into similar classes. And that helps more with pace and support, pace of learning and support, rather than the courses they're taught or the materials they're presented with. So all pupils will have the ability and the materials produced for National 5 presentation from entering the class in S3. However, you'll see if you move along the timelines that final presentation for a lot will be at National 5 and for some will be at National 4. And that's a picture that builds up through the 2 years of the National 4 and 5 courses. And we don't make that final decision, as I'm sure you're aware, but we do make a recommendation. That recommendation is based on fairly robust and strong evidence of what we think is in the best interest of that young person. And we would recommend either National 5 presentation or National 4 presentation. The progression thereafter would often be from National 5 towards higher and from National 4 towards National 5, either in the same science subject or occasionally in a different science subject. Now, there are other pathways and there are many bespoke pathways. Some students will not be achieving at National 4, they may be achieving at National 3, and we can deal with that in a separate way. We use a support for learning faculties to help us with that as well. And there are often quite bespoke situations where we need to do something different. But it would take a long time to go through all of that, so I thought I would just show our main pathways. Again, I can take more questions on that at the end of the presentation. Moving on to S3 and S4 courses. Again, a lot of this you'll be able to find it yourself in course evenings about course contents. I think what I'd like to talk about here just briefly is about an assessment structure and then the progression to S5, and then I'll move on. So one of the things we're still working on, but which I'll mention at the end, but I really wanted to get the assessment structure right when I started here 10 years ago and the national courses have been introduced from S3 moving on to S6. So it had to be proportionate. It had to be not just assessment for assessment's sake. It had to be for reporting to yourselves and for forming next steps, but I really wanted pupils to know how they were doing at these courses. I thought it was my daughters in that class and I'm getting a report home. I want to know how they're coping at National 4 and National 5 level. So at National 5 level in particular, the assessments that we provide our students with are at exam standard. They are made in the main from past papers or past paper materials. They use the same type font, the same duration, the same balance of multiple choice questions and exam questions in the longer section. The only difference is it's obviously on just the one topic at a time and it's shorter. But that means if a pupil in S3 has covered a topic and they're achieving 60%, it means that we know without a doubt that is their standard at that point. And it means that parents also will have that, this is how they're doing, and it gives us so much time to see whether they're coping and need to put interventions in place or not. All that changes when you go through third and fourth year is different content. It's not progression in difficulty level. So we thought that gave us the best opportunity to find out what level our pupils were at and to report accurately. I won't say much more about the balance just now because I don't have a lot of time, but I think we have that correct in terms of how much we're assessing. But like I say, I can maybe take that in the comments. For progression onwards into S5, if I just move on. Now there's a wee bit of text here before I get to the progression pathways, just to talk about, I suppose, grades and levels now. That really, strictly speaking, you need to achieve a pass at a previous level, say at National 5, before progressing on to higher. That's really the entry into the course, and that's from the actual SQ exam results in August. Clearly we don't have those results when we do coursing because people start the courses in June, but we can make a fairly good estimate as how we think pupils will do based on the previous attainment, some of which of course is the prelim. You will notice if you look at any of the SQA's progression statistics, however, that success at that new level, say higher or advanced higher, is usually achieved by pupils who have achieved an A or a B, not just a C award. And it's worth pupils being aware of that, and it's not to put the frighteners on pupils who have just made it in, but it's just so they're aware from the beginning that there's a heck of a lot of work needing to be put into these courses at the next level. And I think it's just we don't take it for granted, and it's also not taken for granted that if you get an A or a B that you will succeed. You know, we have to work hard from day one, but I think it's worth just mentioning that. You'll also be aware that some pupils crash a higher. That's choosing it at a level, say, at higher without having studied it at National 5 and S3 and S4. That is something that is, you know, it's not overly common, but it's certainly not unusual for someone to do that. But we would highly recommend that that was done in S6, just because there'd be less pressure supposed to get your suite of results in one sitting if you're moving on to university. But again, that's something we talk more at length in a course in evening, and I wasn't sure if this would be the format to go into that in any detail. So if it's okay, I'll just move on just now. So here are those pathways for S4 onwards. So, like I say, there will be other ones, but one of the most common would be someone would achieve a pass at National 5 at the end of S4, progress on to higher in S5, and then perhaps on to advanced higher in S6. Someone achieving a National 4 pass in S4, National 5, and then possibly higher. And of course, some students decide not to progress in S5, they may pick a subject up later in S6. But any questions on that or any other bespoke pathways, please ask at the end. Right. Move on. So the courses we offer, you've seen most of there, the National 5 Higher and Advanced Higher within S5 and S6. We also have a baccalaureate course, there's a lab science course as well. I think I've got a slide about the baccalaureate a wee bit later on. I've covered briefly about crashing courses, which I can take questions on later. I think I'll skip talking about course content just now. I'm not sure if that's what you want to hear too much about, but I'll just reiterate again about sort of homework and assessments and about why we do this. To give an accurate idea of how pupils are coping with exam level. What we decided to do across the sciences with our higher courses and in advanced higher is to try and get an early assessment in. And because most of these courses just have 3 topics, the natural breaks would be to have an end of unit assessment at October, and then Christmas at prelim time, and then Easter. And we just felt that October was perhaps a bit late, bearing in mind you start the courses in June, to be finding out if you are really not coping. So for these courses, we put in a half unit exam level test quite early. So that would fit in round about September-ish time, bearing in mind we'll have done usually 3 or 4 weeks in June. And that has served its purpose pretty well, because it usually comes as a real shock to students. And we will have some students who perform extremely poorly in that test, that then dramatically change it moving on. And the good thing about that is the test that comes after isn't on the second half of that topic, it's on the whole topic. So someone has got a chance to remedy how they've performed. So I think that's been quite successful. A lot of the, as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of the jump towards higher and advanced higher courses is actually in the work ethic. People think this is a really hard course, and I'm not saying they're easy, but the biggest shock comes into having to work early and having to put a lot of work in. And I think that first assessment has served its purpose in just showing pupils that that's the case. I think I'll skip the resources part just now, just in the interest of time, and move on. I won't say too much about this next slide about assignments and projects, but some of you may be aware that we have a practical element within the sciences, National 4, National 5, higher and advanced higher level, that has been removed for the last few years as a COVID mitigation. So we haven't done that, and so the pupils who have never experienced this within science. It may well be returning. It certainly won't be for this exam diet coming up, but it may be for the next, for our current S3 pupils. But I just thought to mention that that's something in the past that's formed quite a large part of the work of the faculty to get that right. And if anybody does wish to know more about that, then please just ask. Same with the baccalaureate. It's actually a qualification that pupils are eligible to apply for an S6. Pupils tend to think of it as the project they do, doing the baccalaureate and doing the project. The Science Baccalaureate is an award, and the project that we do is part of that, but they need to have qualifying subjects. So the baccalaureate is actually something you'll achieve if you have qualifying subjects and you have passes in advanced HAs in the sciences, and one of them can be a higher. Maths is included in it as well. So basically there's qualifying subjects that you need to be studying for and pass, but there's also an interdisciplinary project. And I suppose the big advantage or the extra string to your bow in doing the baccalaureate is that this project isn't like another science advanced higher project. It's actually not even all that sciencey. Science is just part of the context. It's very interdisciplinary. And the focus here is really on the pupils. It's a self-evaluation of how they're carrying out the project, of their skills, of where they need to develop. And that's something that's really valuable for moving on in university. So anyone who's interested in that usually have quite a long talk with the person that runs it in the team to explain this to them and the advantages of that. But it's something we're doing quite successfully in science. The member of staff, David Dickinson, who runs it, does a fantastic job. We've done it for a few years, and those that do take part get a lot out of it. Science attainment, I'm not going to say too much about it, I could go on at length here, but suffice to say we do really well in science. Our uptake's huge. Our SQ results are pretty good across the sciences. We can have 90% or so pass rate, which is really about a presentation policy rather than anything else. But our grade A's are usually between 50 and 70% A's at all levels. But I can go into detail on that for anyone who would like. Regarding the measures, the government measures of insight data, we beat our comparators at almost all measures for the SID, for the lowest 20%, in terms of uptake as well. So I sound like I'm bigging up on faculty maybe here. We do very well, but if anybody wants to ask more about that, of course you can. Wider achievement, these are things I really don't have a tremendous amount of expertise on, because while I'm doing the boring stuff, well, the valuable but boring stuff of dealing with ensuring the faculty is running well and people are presented at the right level and everything's running really smoothly, we have this huge team who do all the exciting things and provide a really enriched curriculum for our people in science. So I really can't take a lot of credit for the stuff that happens at Worth, and I don't know a tremendous amount, other than there's a lot going on and a lot of enthusiastic staff in science doing other projects, which I'm glad they are doing. And the same goes with things that would happen outside the classroom. Again, I know COVID has put a bit of a dampener on that for the last few years. Trip to CERN hasn't run for a while, it would run every 2 years. We would use Heriot Watt and Edinburgh University to support our S6. Hopefully that will come back online again, but these are some of the things we have done in the past. What we note about support, I suppose the big message here is we would encourage all parents to send pupils to us. One of the questions I get asked most often at a parents' evening is, how can I support my child in X, Y, or Z? And I'd say, number one, please send them to your teacher. Send them to us. Although we may not always have a come at this time to this subject for this revision, at any time someone can come to me or someone in my faculty and ask for some support, and that'll be arranged, whatever suits the pupil, before school, after school, lunch times. So the big message in support is, yes, we can point you to materials, but please, if you think your child needs support, send them to the science team. We're a big team and we will help. Just so you get an idea of the things we're working on moving forward, differentiation is a bit of a focus for us just now in the team. We have a standing item at our faculty meetings where we look at how we can support our least able and our most able, things we're doing in terms of our literacy, numeracy, practicals. So that's something that every monthly meetings, someone will bring an idea and they'll share that with the team. It's not always on differentiation, but that's one of our focuses for this session. I've mentioned the assessment structure with 3 subjects and 10 presentation levels. It's taken a while, but we're almost where I'd like it. And once we get it to that point, it would then just be maintenance. And maintenance is a lot easier than putting the structure in place in the first instance. Data analysis is ongoing. It's one of my strengths, I think, because I like to look at the data and I like to find out, but not just for the sake of it. I like to try and see if there's something from the data that we can then take back to the team and say, right, we need to work on this area. We need this, sometimes it's particular content areas where we think we're not quite as high as we should be against our comparators. and often it can be something completely separate that we need to work on. But often that comes out of the data analysis. So that's something that's a continuing priority for us. And I think I've probably been talking for long enough. I've done that one. And so yes, so you're pleased to hear, although I could have talked at length about any one of those slides, I thought I'd give you the chance to ask me if it's something you actually want to hear about. So that's me done.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. That was a whistle-stop tour through what is obviously a very large faculty. Could I take the opportunity, we do have questions about your presentation, but could I take the opportunity with the privilege of having the chair at the moment to ask a quick question about your faculty? How big is it in terms of staff, and how is it structured? How many teaching staff do you have? What other staff do you have? And what areas are they all working in?
So yes, so we have, at the moment we have 19 staff. Sometimes it's quite difficult to give an exact number because with a staff at that size, we have people often on secondments within the school, or with maternity leave, temporary staff coming in. Basically, we have 19 teaching staff at present. We have the 4 support staff, that's our technicians, that's increased because of the helping out with the GME provision in Darragh. The 19 teaching staff all can teach science in S1 and S2, but they of course have their subject specialists. Although I'm the head of science, physics is my subject, and so we would have roughly sort of 5 or 6 teachers each that are physics, chemistry and biology. So that gives us that wee bit of flexibility when it comes to numbers moving into this sort of timetable. If there's a slightly bigger uptake in one area than the other, and we need more staffing, then perhaps say physics might do more of the S1, S2. So we have that little bit of flexibility within S1, S2 within all of us. But obviously, S3 to S6, a biology teacher teaches biology, a physics teacher teaches physics.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. It's obviously a very large department by any standards, I would have thought, for to have that many teaching staff as well as other staff. I think one of the things you mentioned in your presentation was that data is something you're very interested in. So we have a question here, which is, what percentage of school students achieve a Nat 5 or more in at least one science subject? Now, I would have thought that was quite a lot, because science is one of the compulsory elements that people have to take when they go into S3, but are you able to comment on that, or more widely about, how pupils do at Nat 5?
Right, so in fact, the thing that might be quite tricky there, but just ask for that question to be repeated. Is it the percentage, of course, as of the school cohort that achieve at one science?
Yeah, it is. You might not be able to answer that, but if you can give us any background, that would be interesting.
The indication is that the vast majority of the pupils will pick at least one science. Not all. I think I'm right in that, Neil, that there will be some students that will pick maybe an environmental science or something else in the science column, but the majority of students will pick a science, at least one science. And is the question specifically asking about National 5 qualification?
Yes, it is.
Right, so I would say out of all of those students, I'd have to check to give an exact date, and I can get back to you on this one, but the breakdown between, say, National 3, 4 and National 5, it's probably about, I think, about 80% towards National 5 and 20% towards the National 4. But that's me off the top of my head just now. I've currently got a list I'm working on just now at school to get the presentations correct. That's got all, 767, I think, is presentations on it. And the reason I can't give an exact number right now is because although we've done the presentation recommendations home, some of the people who would recommend for to study National 4 are choosing to do National 5. So there's a wee bit fluid between the National 4 and National 5. But of those that choose National 5, we would have in the main 90% plus will achieve the National 5. Very often that 10% who don't are the ones we had recommended were presented for National 4. It is very uncommon for those that we recommend to present at National 5 that don't achieve. There may be 1 or 2 per year who would expect to get a National 5 that don't.
Thank you very much, Ian. I've got a further, it's quite a specific question about biology teaching, and the question is, my understanding is that my S3 is doing Nat 4 biology 1 period per week with 1 teacher, and Nat 5 biology with another teacher for 2 periods per week. Could you please explain a little about this approach stroke rationale?
Okay, so I can make a fair prediction on this one, but without knowing the details. So I'm going to predict what I think is what's happening here. Within our courses and all of the sciences, for all of our pupils, we would effectively work towards National 5, but we cover National 4 as well. So in all of my science classes, we can cover National 4 and National 5. The materials they'll have in the main are for National 5, and these assessments are mainly at National 5. But because it can actually be fairly trivial for a lot of our able pupils to achieve a National 4 as well, we can run that concurrently. So within my classes in science, for example, we can do the assessments fairly quickly, and anything that's only National 4 content we can cover fairly quickly, because a lot of the time the National 4 content feeds in towards National 5. However, there are some subjects, and biology is one of them, where there can be standalone National 4 biology content, which can be a bit of a pain. So to take that approach, some teachers may decide to spend a few weeks or a month working on that part of the topic. And sometimes if it's a class is split between two teachers, as it sounds like it is in this case, it may be decided that for a small period of time, the teacher said, could you cover the National 4 work for then? So we get that for the whole class, and I'll cover the National 5. Other teachers wouldn't do that approach, depends on how they want to work together. Sometimes the advantage in that, I suppose, is you don't need a daily handover or a weekly handover, because for that period of time, one member of staff is working on this area and another member of staff is working on that. And the other approach, where you're doing the same thing, you need to have a weekly handover. I got to this point, you've asked me to do this, and so on. So you'd be working on the same material. So when you were covering the National 4 content, both teachers would be doing that. That's my best guess is what's happened there.
Thanks, Ian. That's very interesting and something I didn't know about biology at all. I've another question, a very specific one. Do you know, does engineering count as a science towards the baccalaureate that you've just been talking about?
As far as I know, no. As far as I'm aware, no.
Could you tell me which subjects you know do count
Yeah.
as in the science baccalaureate?
Basically, as the advanced hires, or the hires, need to be at least 2 advanced hires, but hires count as well if you have enough. It's physics, chemistry, biology, but maths counts as well. But you need to have at least 2 of the hires. So you couldn't do higher maths, advanced higher maths, and advanced higher chemistry, because then you don't have 2 within the sciences. But I think you could definitely do advanced higher chemistry and physics and higher maths. I'm fairly sure you could have higher physics, advanced higher chemistry, and advanced higher maths. So I think so long as you have 3 and 2 of them are within the traditional sciences, you're okay. But this is an area where it's, like I say, it's Debbie Dickinson who teaches this. And usually when a pupil comes to me and they can't find Debbie, I'll say something similar to this, and I'll always finish off by saying, please go and find Miss Dickinson, because she knows this stuff like the back of her hand.
It sounds like if anybody's interested, they should pursue that with the science faculty for more information. Another question on science. My S1 child is thoroughly enjoying science lessons this year. Thank you. Can you share some examples of how the science curriculum is being decolonised at S1, S2 level? And that's a kind of school-wide thing, looking at decolonising the curriculum. Thanks.
I can probably tell you a little bit what we're doing in terms of diversity. In terms of things that are being removed from the S1 or S2 courses, I wouldn't say there's part of the curriculum that's necessarily needed to be removed. But in terms of a focus, one of the things that we are doing, we had the traditional, one of the E's and O's in science was the Scottish scientists. You had to promote Scottish scientists, and we've taken a little bit of a liberty there to shift that slightly in towards promoting female scientists and also people of various ethnic origin and people of colour. So that's something that we've had a wee bit of a shift and a focus towards within science. Also in terms of careers, you know, there's that you can't see, you know, be what you can't see. So we have some of the posters going down the biology corridor of people in different fields of science work, and again we're trying to make sure that it represents on many different backgrounds. So it is something that we are working on within science. It's just in terms of actual course content areas, it's probably one area that has less than others in terms of things that needed to perhaps removed or changed. But we are cognizant of that, how we approach and how we come across, and we want our young people to see that science can be studied by all.
Thank you very much, Ian. So one final question on science, and then we can move on to Neil's report. Do you teach science and languages other than English? I don't mean you personally, I think it's presumably within the faculty.
Yes, but yes, science is one of the Gaelic medium subjects. So we have a teacher, Carol McLennan, that's been teaching science in our Darach annex this session and last mainly through the medium of Gaelic. So yes.
Thank you very much, Ian, for coming this evening for your presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the meeting is going to be recorded, so this will be up online if you want to revisit what Ian has been saying, along with the PowerPoint presentation. And obviously there's an open invitation there to contact the science faculty to ask all the questions that you didn't get a chance or didn't think about asking this evening. And also, I don't know, you're a physicist, aren't you, Ian, about how does a black hole function, or difficult things like that as well. That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Ian is going to be leaving now, so if we have any further questions about science that crop up later, then we will send them on to the science faculty after the meeting. Thanks very much, Ian.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening.
Thanks. So now we're going to pass on to Neil McCallum, who will give his head teacher's report. Thanks very much, Neil.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for having me again this evening, and thanks to Ian for his input there. So updates from me this evening in regards to staffing. We're trying to fill one of our modern language vacancies. The interviews for that take place on Thursday morning, so I should hopefully have an update for you, my Friday update, to share who the successful candidate has been in regards to that. We're still trying to fill our workshop technician. We had actually filled that vacancy, but then the person withdrew after accepting the job, so we've had to re-advertise that, and the interviews for that are taking place on Thursday, the 30th of March. We successfully appointed an additional science technician to support with the classroom down at Darach and across the wider science faculty, and Alex O'Neill started with us on the 20th of February and has settled in well to part of the team, so she's been a fantastic addition. I can also share with you that one of our admin officers, Sharon Kerr, who's been with us for about 10 years at the high school, has now decided that it's time for a change for her, and she's taken on a similar position at Tynecastle High School and leaves us after the Easter break. So we'll take up her position on the 17th of April. In regards to the other staffing aspects as we begin to look towards the next academic year, I'll update you with them as I have that information. Industrial action, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that all the teaching unions organisations have reached agreement with COSLA that represent the local authorities, and that they have now accepted the offer from COSLA. So this will bring an end to the industrial action, and the agreement to extend that. The update in terms of that takes us forward to August 2024 with 3 different aspects to that agreement, and normally those negotiations begin in February. So it began in February 22. As part of this agreement, they have moved that to August, so August 24 is when the last part of this agreement kicks in, and then we'll hopefully have a smoother transition going forwards. At the last Parent Council, we spoke about toilets. We've had assemblies with all year groups to share with them our concerns over the toilets and the need for their voice to make sure that we can take the toilets forward. I've also very helpfully received information from some of the Parent Council who were at the last in-person meeting, which has been really supportive, and I'm trying to link in with colleagues from the centre to make sure that we can tick all the boxes and make sure we have absolutely got the right legislation in place and we're following the legislation. I've also met with some pupil groups to try and use their knowledge and feedback to take the correct approach here and getting the full pupil voice, linking in with our rights respecting groups, looking at having a suggestion box both physically and online, ensuring that the toilets are accessible for all of our young people, and that they're a safe space and that they can access them in an appropriate manner. Also trying to link in with our facilities management team to make sure that any willful damage is replaced as quickly as possible, and also linking in with our day ranger to try and keep on top of the condition of the toilet. So I've got a lot of feedback and a lot of information to take forward, and as I say, we want to try and make sure that the toilets we have, that they are set up in absolutely the right way to ensure the best outcome for all of our young people. So that's been really a lot of listening for me in regards to that, and to understand from the young people's perspective what we need to do to make that a much better situation than it currently seems to be. At the last meeting, also talked about the homework policy that the school has, and I have our first meeting. I was delighted to receive about 20 responses from parents who were keen to be involved in a working group looking at the school homework policy and the aspects that parents and carers would be looking for, and I can see that's obviously coming through in some of the questions this evening and over the course of time, and the resources that we're able to share through the website or other appropriate means. So the first meeting is taking place tomorrow evening, and I'll bring an update at the next meeting, and I'm looking forward to working with the parents and carers. Similarly, we've set up a communications working group, and I have about 8 or 9 parents who are keen to be involved in that working group, and again looking at the different aspects of how we communicate, what we need to do better, how we can take that forwards, making sure that we have specific newsletters, whether that be for houses or year groups, and also looking at the communications that we share and trying to put them into different ranges of languages and make sure that they're communicated and shared. We relaunched the app just following the February break as well, and again trying to encourage the use of that both across the parent carer population, but also from staff in terms of the resources that we can share through that. So items such as the head teacher weekly update, which we will continue to send out by email as well, so we can allow everybody access, and again that'll be part of the work of the communications group to look at that and see if there are other approaches that we could have to make sure that we're sharing news in an appropriate and accessible way for all of our school community. An update on our Wi-Fi. And Sarah touched on this in her update at the beginning of the meeting, and just to share the latest kind of situation, I've spoken with Laura Stewart, our deputy, who takes forward empowered learning and ICT in the school. And really the update in regards to Wi-Fi is that as we've now gone down the empowered learning and the use of iPads, there's a specific network which is for the iPads and which was secure and protected for the teaching and learning iPads only. And you may remember that back just before October time there were some issues in and around that. And YouTube was removed, but our young people had a representation at the full council. Some of our pupil voice who did an amazing presentation held their own at the full council to get that back online. So that EL network is there, which is only for iPads, and obviously the iPads are controlled in a way in terms of the apps that can be downloaded, and the use of Apple Classroom to allow teachers to interact with the young people and to monitor usage of the iPads in activity in classrooms. The old LT Open network, which was used for the S6 to bring your own device, was then to be closed. And the benefits of this meant that passwords wouldn't be passed around with younger year groups for a network which couldn't filter, as well as a range of personal devices and accessing items such as Snapchat, social media, etc. So all S5 and S6 students last year were issued with their iPads in advance of the project. At that point they joined the LT Open, however we've had to migrate these over to the EL network during the deployment of the empowerment project S1 to S4s, and the S5 and S6 students were given support and information on this at the time. Some of them chose not to migrate as they could initially still access the LT Open, and they now have to carry out this process to stay online as the LT Open has been completely closed down. are a couple of real exceptional circumstances for access to the LT Open, and that might be in and around where there's a requirement to access software to support an extracurricular programme, for example, the F1 in Schools programme, where they need software to be able to participate in that programme. But that would be a real exceptional circumstance, and that would be through discussion with Mrs. Stewart to see whether we could arrange that, because really everything that hopefully our young people need to access, certainly through the curriculum, should be accessible through the iPads now. And if there's an issue with that, I know our IT support team and our computing department are very happy to support all our young people to make sure that that migration has happened. I suppose the positive out of that has been the reduction in phone use and phone issues in and around classes, and that's obviously been quite notable from a learning and teaching perspective, and obviously having the iPads and having the access to the LT, that much better solution, and I know that has grown and developed and improved over the last number of weeks, and we had further input last week from CGI, who supply the IT procurement for the city, and looking at some of our wireless access points. So that certainly helped in terms of progressing and reviewing that. But as always, we'll continue to monitor that, review that, and feed back into the citywide picture about what we need to do to make sure that things are as positive and as supportive for our young people as possible. Next topic we're going to talk about is the one of misogyny, and since I took up the post on a permanent basis at the start of December, and really since post-Christmas time, this is something that's come across the radar, certainly in the public domain with Andrew Tate, and I know there is work taking place with officers at the headquarters for the authority, looking at that and how they can support across the school estate, and taking that forward and linking into inequalities. Again, I've met in the last few weeks with a number of groups of young people to get their view and perspectives on this. And there's been a lot of listening for me again, but it's been really interesting for me, and obviously something that absolutely shouldn't be prevalent in our society, and certainly not prevalent in our school. So we're going to be working hard in terms of changing the culture and the ethos and how we do that, and obviously making sure our school values are there at the heart of what we're doing. Need to look into how we support the young people who would be at the centre of that, and how that process is taken forwards, and how the supports that are available. The nurture aspect is absolutely crucial here, and ensuring well-being of all our young people is at the centre of what we do in terms of moving forwards. I think there's also work to do in educating our young people about how they behave, and how they work with others, and also staff training that we need to look at to make sure that they have a sound understanding and a strong knowledge base, and also how we support our neurodiverse young people in these regards. The young people suggested that we have a whistleblowing policy for students, which would be really beneficial, and again we'll look at that and what is the best way for that to be taken forwards. We have an assembly, we've already had them for S1 and S2 on hate crimes. We're going to have one for our S3s next week, which looking at hate crimes and inappropriate behaviours, and that's supported by Alison Morton, PC Alison Morton, our community police officer, as well as Nathan Reedy from Police Scotland. And we're also engaging in Edinburgh University research programme on equally safe at school, and we're focusing that in with our S3s, because that's where a real strong voice is coming through in terms of these types of behaviours, which are completely inappropriate and just not acceptable for us in our school. Again, Sarah touched on the Hayward review that's currently ongoing. We have had two representatives from the Scottish Government's Educational Directorate to visit us on the 2nd of March. They met with a group of staff and group of young people from S5 and S6 to get their perspective on the proposed implementation of phase 3 of the programme, and looking at what they're doing in terms of how exams should take place, what the qualifications should look like, interdisciplinary learning, the inclusion of wider achievement in the aspect of young people's qualifications and how they progress schools. So that was a really positive day where the young people were very articulate and gave the two colleagues from Scottish Government a lot of feedback, as did the staff. So I think they found that a really useful and beneficial visit to the school. Certainly gave them plenty of things to think about in terms of that feedback. And I'm having an open workshop for staff after school tomorrow to allow them to give feedback, which we can then feed back into the Hayward Review as a school. We're having a visit again from the Scottish Government tomorrow as part of an OECD, which is the International Education Organisation at the Darragh campus, and that's going to include delegates from, the Scottish Government, as well as visitors from New Zealand, Canada and Finland. We're going to be looking at the GME strategy, curriculum and resourcing, wider achievement and community, and that longer term development strategy in and around education in Scotland at the moment, and how that's impacting us and how we're looking to take that forward as an organisation. So that should be quite an engaging day tomorrow, and we look forward to meeting and welcoming our visitors. Coursing and timetabling, Mrs. O'Brien, a deputy head who has got the lead for coursing and timetabling, has been working hard to try and facilitate all of the requests in terms of coursing. I know she's had fairly high success rate in terms of the requests from S2 into S3, S4 into S5 and S5 into S6, and she's been working to begin to put the timetable together to make sure that we're ready to go for the launch of the new timetable on Monday the 5th of June. So she's at the stage now where the aspects in and around S3, 4, 5 and 6 are just about there and finalised, and I'll ask her for a rough idea of the timeline that we can share with you in and around when young people will know. Again, if your young person hasn't had communication from Mrs. O'Brien at this point, the likelihood is that the subjects that they've chosen to go forward with in the coming academic year are the ones that they'll be able to move forward with. Easter study programme and support for young people ahead of the SQA exam diet, which starts after the Easter holiday. Mrs. Stewart is pulling that programme together, and I would hope we'd have that out with you this week via email, so hopefully that should be coming to you as quickly as possible. There are also the online Easter have an Easter study programme running as well, and again we'll get that information out to you to make sure that you're aware of what's happening, and all of our young people also have access to Scholar, another online resource to help them prepare and study for the examinations that are coming up. Upcoming events that we have Mental Health Information Evening, which is taking place on Thursday. We have our S1 residential this coming weekend. We have the Spring Fling, which is happening next Tuesday and Wednesday evenings. And then obviously we finish up on Friday at the normal time for the end of term for the Easter break, with everyone resuming on the 17th of April. And the last thing to update you on was, again, at the last meeting in the building, I talked about trying to see whether we'd be able to run an alternative timetable in May time. And unfortunately, we've not had the response that we would have hoped from staff to be able to make that happen on this occasion. I think the combination of the industrial action and the timescale for us to pull this together, we had about 900 young people that we would have to have had activities for, and I think the ratios that we need to have for some of the activities have made that just a bit too tight in terms of the timescale. However, the S3 who've not had an S1 residential or any kind of outdoor education experience, we are going ahead with that in that week. And Debbie Dickinson, who is one of our science teachers that Ian mentioned earlier, is very keen to take that forward, and we've now had discussions with the outdoor education team at the centre, So we have that all booked in, and I know Debbie will be in touch with parents and carers of S3 to make sure that they have that information as soon as possible. And the S2, so similarly, have not had that opportunity. We've got that provisional booking in for the same time the following year to make sure that, again, they're going to get an opportunity to have an experience that they didn't get as a result of the different legislations or guidelines that we were at that point. So trying to make sure that that happens as effectively for them as possible. And then the last thing from me will be in and around study leave, and Mr. Cotter, who's our deputy head teacher with responsibility for the SQA, will be sending communication this week to 4th, 5th and 6th year parents in and around study leave, which will start from Friday the 21st of April and will run through until the last exam. We're looking at inductions on the 1st and 2nd of June for new 5th and new 6th years, with a new timetable starting for all year groups on Monday the 5th of June. And that run us through the whole of June, and we'll also have our S1 transition visits, which will take place in June as well. And I think that's all from me at the moment, Steph. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was a very full report, and I see that you have managed to cover a number of the questions which were raised in the Q&A about things like Easter study and the start of the new timetable and other things like that. So that's very helpful. So we have a number of questions. Undoubtedly, we're not going to get through all of them, and I will aim to get a range of different types of questions answered this evening. I'd emphasise that if you have a question which isn't answered but you would like it answered, please do follow up with the parent councillor or the school after the meeting, and we will follow that up at that point. We will close the Q&A board in 5 minutes, so if you have any further questions to add, please put them in now, and after that we'll just deal with some of the questions we have, and I think we'll look at maybe finishing by 8:30 if that's okay with Neil, and dealing with what we can. So as I say, that Neil has already covered some of the questions which have come up in the Q&A board. There are also questions about toilets and misogyny, which are two obviously very big and important issues and ongoing issues. So I think I won't go to those ones now because Neil has already talked about those and the steps which the school are taking, but this is something I think that the Parent Council is going to come back to in future occasions at meetings in the future, because obviously these are important issues, and toilets is an issue that was discussed at length at the last Parent Council in person, and it's really good to hear about the steps that the school is taking to look at that in collaboration, particularly with the students, but also with the whole school community, because there are so many issues connected with toilets. Could I then go on to, but my first, can I just pick up a question from something you said in your report firstly, Neil, with regard to the alternative timetable, and you set out that you didn't get the response in terms of teachers able to offer activities for the 900, it's a lot of kids, that would be involved in S1, 2 and 3 in the alternative timetable, but there were plans for outdoor education for S3, and there will be for S2, and obviously S1 have had their residential trip, which is the first time in a number of years. Where does that leave us with the alternative timetable? Does that mean it's definitely not happening, or have you still got hopes that something might happen, or what should we expect about that?
Yeah, so we're going to go back to staff and obviously say we don't have enough to run it as a full alternative timetable as we would know it in the kind of traditional sense. What we will maybe try and do is see if there's anything that we are able to run, and again trying to link in with the different faculties and departments who were kind of responsive in terms of what they could offer and what they could do. Again, I'll give you absolute clarity on that, as I say, once we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, but certainly won't be running something to the extent that it would be the whole school would be off timetable for 3 days to allow those activities to happen, and it's certainly not what we were hoping for. But as I say, given the uncertainty over about who was going to be the head teacher going forward, and not really being able to take that forward until January, February time, and the lead-in time, I think that's been a thing for a lot of the staff in and around that aspect. So we will try and offer what activities we can, but it certainly wouldn't be in the manner to which we were hoping we would be able to run it.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Neil, for the clarification. It's certainly, I think the alternative timetable would be a very popular thing, but I do appreciate that that's a lot of kids to organise activities for. So we would certainly appreciate, I think, as parents, anything that can be offered if that is possible. Moving on to another issue, we have a long comment and question about space and private study in the school. I'll try and cover the main points because it's quite long, but basically about the use of booths and other parts of the main campus for study space for S6 pupils, but people end up being moved away from their studying even though they are busy with advanced higher dissertation handings and other things like that, whether it's possible now or in the future to use the Darach more for, I think, private study and also in terms of teaching. How will that look in the future? Because obviously the main buildings are very busy, but the Darach building is comparatively quiet at the moment. Could you tell us what your thoughts are about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, our site here have been fantastic and responded really well. Obviously, we still have teaching areas adjacent to the social space or the study space that the S6 would use, in both areas on the ground floor of the Malala Yousafzai building. And unfortunately, if there tends to be more than a few of them, then the noise can have an impact on the learning and teaching of the other classes which are adjacent to that. And because they're not classrooms with permanent walls, they were obviously initially designed into the building as breakout research areas, which are now being used because of the capacity issue for teaching and learning. So we're trying to make them as accessible as possible, but again, we're staff are trying to work with the sixth year to say, look, if there are times where it's just too noisy, could they find another space? The forum is available. We're not using the forum for classes. The library would be available at a lot of time as well. I appreciate that the dining space in the Muriel Sparks building is maybe not where they would want to study, but again, we've also opened up the Darach building. The sixth years have got a kind of common room space down there, and there are quite a few spaces down in the Darach building, which they're more than welcome to access as nice spaces, some study booths, and again has the access to resources that they would have on the main site. In terms of going forwards, we're certainly looking to maximise the use of the Darach building to make sure that the resources and the facilities there and the classroom spaces are utilised to their maximum potential going forwards. That's something that Mrs. O'Brien is looking at, which will hopefully bring the benefit to those spaces where the study booths are, that we're not having to use those spaces in the same way. I'm also trying to have some conversations with officers at the centre in and around what can we do with those spaces which have temporary half-height walls at present to try and make them more permanent teaching and learning spaces, because certainly from the projected school roles, these are spaces that we're going to be needing to use in the long term going forward. So if we can get the officers in the centre to engage with us and support us with that, and utilise the Darach campus to its full potential, that's certainly what we're looking to do going forward. So and again, appreciate for our sixth years and our fifth years will be coming up next year, they'll be looking for spaces to be able to use their study periods to focus in and use those resources. And again, there are certainly plenty of spaces around that we can allow them to do that. So, okay.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. This is obviously a very complicated issue, but also a very important issue for the working of the school, and one that I think we're all very aware of. Just to emphasise that the letter I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, which was being sent to the convener of the Education Committee, as representing sort of education policy for what the school, for what the council is going to do with regards to schools in the future, about just this issue, about planning for capacity as the school gets is projected to get even larger over the next few years, to ensure that there is space, that there will be enough specialist space, that the space is appropriate, that we don't, and I think this is a fear that some parents have, quite understandably, that we have a situation where there's more focus than is would otherwise be required on learning through Teams rather than learning in person after the whole period with COVID and disruption. Obviously, people are keen to be back in the school, and also resources in terms of teaching staff to make sure that we have enough of a budget to cover all that we have to do, including for both English medium and Gaelic medium. And that's definitely something that we are pursuing with the council. And one of the questions was, will Joan Griffiths ever respond? And I have to say, in my experience, councillors are very good at responding to requests. This is a complicated issue, and I imagine she has to work with council officers to get an appropriate response together. We will definitely be pushing for that and for discussions. That's what we're looking for them to engage with us about how we take this forward. We're acutely aware that the council and the school obviously talk to each other a lot, but it's very difficult for the school to push issues like this in the way that parents can. So I think that's our job in the future, to make sure this remains top of the agenda for the people at Council HQ. They know that's a really important issue. So moving on to another question, and this is something that comes up a lot at parent council meetings. It's when my S3 has an assessment coming up, I don't think he knows how to study and he just reads what is on Teams. Are they given advice, guidance and ideas on study techniques? Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sure if Ian was here, I would imagine he would be happy to answer this as well. So yes, they should be given study guides and techniques, and again, quite often revision sheets in and around the different aspects. And I know teachers are working hard to use Teams so as those resources are available. And I think that's something with the homework home learning group that we need to look at, and I know that's something that's come through from some parents in the last few months about the access to resources, and it was something that was mentioned earlier on with Ian about how can we support young people at home, and something that I'm very keen to do going forward is to have evenings at the start of the new academic year where parents and carers can come into the building and we can support in terms of how parents and carers can support at home as well, and look at that across a range of different carousel workshops. So there's an opportunity there to have an understanding of what's involved in the curriculum, which resources you can access and where you can access them from. I know in PSE, and I'll need to go back and double check myself whether they do this in S3, but I know that certainly in S4 they do a section on study skills and how to prepare for assessments and how to utilise your time when preparing for the SQA exam, diet, your prelims, is all covered with them. Again, if it's not something that they cover in PSE and S3, then I think probably given the nature of our curriculum rationale, that would be something that we should be looking at in terms of S3 and probably touching on with our younger students as well.
Thank you, Neil. Can we go on to a different topic now, which is going back to school excursions? There are a couple of sort of linked questions here about that. One of them wanting to know why it is, or how is it can be managed that other groups can get insurance to go abroad. And a second question saying Firhill S6 pupils are off to South Korea in August 2023 and have been fundraising for this during the year. Can GGHS push the council for a similar trial with some of our schools' overseas trips next year and beyond, please? Otherwise, I doubt my S3 will go on an overseas trip. As I understand, most faculty trips are geared towards S3 and 4. So those raise some interesting issues. Obviously, we're within the hands of the council and their policies and their insurance with regard to anything that happens in terms of school excursions. But I was interested to hear about the Firhill plans. I don't know whether that's because that's after the summer or how that works, but maybe Neil, you can give us your best bet on that.
Yeah, well, I was a bit surprised about the Firhill one. We've certainly pushed, sorry, was quite live there. Certainly a little bit surprised about the Firhill one. I know I was on a short-life working group trying to look at the policy to try and get things moving as quickly as possible, and actually we've tried to see about progressing a couple of our foreign trips, but been told that we're not in that position at the moment, so that anything that's overseas shouldn't be progressed, and a lot of that is in and around the insurance aspect. I know there was a presentation by officers from the centre to our modern language leads, curriculum leaders, because obviously the foreign exchanges that take place and the educational value of them and the opportunities for young people to experience languages in a foreign country and to be able to take those life skills forward has been something that's been really key. I know it's something that both this year and last year and the two schools I've been working in, that the schools and the parents and carers have been really keen for that to be progressed and for those opportunities to be available. So I can certainly go back and inquire as to the nature of how a school is taking that forward in the fundraising that they're doing, if we're being told that nothing should be organised at this point. And I know certainly a number of the staff are very keen to get moving as quickly as possible, because again, when we're organising these opportunities, we want to give parents and carers as much time as possible. With the cost of these things, we're very aware of the current cost of living situation that's going on across the country. And trying to make sure that, again, there's opportunities opened up which are equitable and accessible for all of our young people. And that's been part of the process that the authority have been taking to looking at the opportunities that are available. And again, that's why in some of our faculties, they've been trying to look at some alternative opportunities that they could take forwards this year, which don't require going overseas, and the cost implications that come with that in and around the insurance. And obviously, when we're doing these excursions, it's the city's insurance that we're taking. So I'll certainly go back and try to do some investigating and see if I can get some answers. But please be reassured that the staff in the school are very keen for these opportunities to return. Our partner schools that we work with in France and Germany and Spain and South Africa are very keen to engage with us again, and have the opportunities to be able to work with our young people and for those relationships to return to what they were pre-COVID. So yeah, a little bit of investigation for me to do there in terms of what's happening in another school in the authority, and I'll come back to you in regards to that.
So thank you, Neil. Now on to another topic which comes up regularly at Parent Council meetings. How can parents support learning at home? Is there a way to see topics covered or practice worksheets, etc.? And is there any way to get a sense of how well they're doing in tests and gaps in learning, etc., as they go through the year? This is a question that was probably asked at pretty much every Parent Council meeting over the last few years. I don't know whether you can comment on that again, Neil, or whether this is something that might be covered at all in the homework working group that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, no, very much so. I think that's a resource that we need to make available for parents and carers, is to be able to have an overview of the different topics that they're covering. That's a resource I would like to have on the website, and I know a number of the people who have put themselves forward to be part of the homework group. That's an area that they're very keen to have that overview, and again, that relates back to what we'd like to do at the start of the academic year for the different year groups, is to have evenings where parents and carers can come in and we can share that information and point towards those resources. And I think we need to make sure that those resources are available and easily accessible. I know a lot of staff will have put those resources on Teams for young people, but I do understand that teenagers are not always willing to share those resources with parents and carers, so we need to make it accessible for everybody. So that's certainly something that we're going to be working on to try and make sure that's there.
Thanks. Now we've got to about 8:25, so I think we'll maybe take another couple of questions and aim to finish at 1:30. Again, I'll just emphasise that if your question has not been answered and you would like it answered, then please do get in touch and we will follow that up. I see one of the questions in the Q&A is about whether we couldn't possibly do the document that we used to do after parent council meetings, which rounded up all the questions and put answers together and posted that online. Although I would love to say we could do that, the reason that we moved away from it was because it was an incredibly time-consuming thing behind the scenes for the parent council and particularly for the school to put together. And in fact, by the time it was put together, it tended to be out of date in lots of different ways. So that's why we're looking at a kind of more targeted approach to make sure that the things that we can cover the things that people would really like us to cover, because originally that scheme was set up during the pandemic when everybody was at home, in fact, which meant that there weren't really as many opportunities to engage with the school, to ask questions, to find out what was happening. We thought it was really important to make sure that we were helping very specifically in that way, but obviously the situation is a bit more difficult now. So I'd love to say yes, but no, I don't think we'll be going back to that at the moment. So Neil, we have a question about COVID catch-up. So has the school some plan to increase the level of education to recuperate the time lost during the pandemic and to prepare properly the pupils for the Nat 5s so they will have the chance to have similar preparation stroke outcome of the kids studying the schools belonging to the same catchment area? I don't understand the end of the question there, but obviously catch-up learning was a thing that was talked about a lot as we came out of the sort of the main pandemic period. Do you have any comment about that, or what is the current thinking about what we do in terms of that learning?
A lot of this is in around one pace and challenge in the classroom, so it's ensuring that teachers are the pace and challenge right for our young people. I think it's about identifying the areas where our young people need support. So part of that has been linking in with our cluster primaries, our transition teacher, looking at the data that we've got in around particularly literacy and numeracy, which are obviously the building blocks for everything that we do across the curriculum. And as we progress through school, and if we're talking about preparing for National 5, then again, it's we're fortunate in a way, I suppose, that our young people are choosing at the end of S2 and looking to take National 5 course level work across both S3 and S4. And then also looking about the additional opportunities that are offered to young people, whether that be lunchtime, after school study support and what those offers are, and trying to have a targeted approach. We're also achieve to succeed support for young people who maybe have struggled more through the pandemic and access to learning, and we've got a very targeted approach with very small groups to try and ensure that they get the best qualifications that they can before the end of this academic year, and that's something that we're very keen to take forward next year to ensure that we have that targeted approach. So I think it's trying to look at the data and use that data to identify where young people are. It's also the professional approach from our teaching staff in terms of the pace and challenge of the learning to make sure that we're moving at an appropriate pace and there's a good level of differentiation to support all of our young people, and how we take that forward, whether that be in S1 or further up into the national qualifications.
Thank you, Neil. No, I said it would be the last question coming up, but there's a couple of ones I was going to ask you here. Well, firstly, it was a comment, which was the present S4 pupils also did not get an S1 residential, which is of course correct because the pandemic hit us in the spring of that year. So that's also a year group which didn't get an S1 residential. So I don't know whether the school, just to add to your burdens, can think about what could be done for that year group too. And the question was, reflecting on the recruitment update, can Neil update on the current teaching vacancies in the GME stream? I understand many Gaelic classes are being covered by non-Gaelic speakers. So we'll make that last question of the evening.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So I know Donald made an appointment before the summer holidays, and unfortunately the person that was appointed for personal reasons wasn't able to continue after the September holiday. So we've advertised that position several times to try and fill the vacancy. I've had no success, unfortunately, and again, haven't been able to access supply teachers that we would like in a way. However, the staff that we do have who teach through the GME, particularly Mr. Medvin and Miss McKeever or DHT, have both taken on additional classes, but what they've also done is work with a consistent supply teacher to try and make sure that although they're not a Gaelic speaker, that they're delivering the GME curriculum as far as possible. We have just re-advertised last week again for another GME teacher, and crossing everything that we'll have applicants for this post, and we're also put forward that we would be very happy to take on a probationer in GME or any of our GME subjects to try and ensure that we have a wider staff pool to be able to support that should we have this kind of situation in the future. But it's one we've been very aware of, one we're trying very hard to resolve, but just haven't been successful, unfortunately, at this point. But I know Miss McKeever and myself, along with Mr. Medvin, have been trying to utilise networks to see what we can do to try and promote the vacancy and to try and fill that. So I'm hopeful that post Easter we'll have a successful candidate.
Thank you, Neil. So we'll call that the end of the Q&A, and we'll wind up the meeting now. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening and for all of your questions. And as I mentioned, please let us know if you would like us to follow up anything after the meeting. Thank you to Neil and to Ian, who's now gone, for their updates and for answering questions. And I say this every time, but it's very true. We are really glad to have the opportunity for parents to hear direct from staff about all these issues and to be able to ask questions. That's a really valuable part of the Parent Council experience. Just a final reminder that our next meeting will be in person in the school library on Wednesday, 31st of May, and we will send out more information about that meeting nearer the time. We look forward to seeing as many people as possible there. But for the meantime, thank you and good night.